Bringing readers and authors together. That's what the Sunshine State Book Festival is all about. And what I am thrilled about is the opportunity to be able to introduce you to some of the authors who will be a part of this year's Sunshine State Book Festival in Gainesville, Florida, January 27th and the 28th at Trinity United Methodist Church. My guest today from Arizona, and Richard, you are in Florida, but you're
Naples, Florida.
in Naples, Florida. That's the beauty of this. I am just really enjoying the opportunity to speak to authors that are all over the United States who will be coming here to Florida. These gentlemen, now they may not look like they have a soft spot in their hearts for children, but what is that supposed to look like anyway? But they do. Both of these gentlemen have written children's books and have come from various backgrounds, but two areas that you would not think of authors who would end up writing children's books that would come from. Both of them technical kind of writers in their own respects, but then came to write children's books. So, gentlemen, first of all, thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So, Richard, you started, you technical writer, wrote for newspapers and magazines, and then you write this children's book, but it happened after something, a very sad situation that happened in your family with your wife and for your sons.
All right. My wife passed away when she was 38 and I was 39. And I just wanted to make my kids laugh. So I started coming up with stories. And one of them was my first children's book called A Mouse in the White House, which is now Martin the Mouse in the White House. And I just wanted to have a story that showed that basically kids are smarter than adults and that they can problem solve. And that no matter how small you are, you can figure things out.
And then William Hart, this is your first children's book, your first time coming to the book festival. And so elephants are not artists. How did you get inspired by that? You have a 4-year-old son. How did you get inspired to write children's books?
Yeah, so I have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and for a while I worked for the Phoenix Zoo here in Phoenix, Arizona. And whenever I started working there, I learned of this elephant named Ruby who had been there in the 90s, and she painted. So they gave her paintbrushes. They realized she was using a stick to kind of draw on the ground, and so they gave her a paintbrush and canvas, and she started creating art. And her art was really sought after for a long time. And I couldn't get that story out of my head. Like I would come home and think about it and talk about it with my kids. And so one night I just thought, I need to write this down. If I write it down, I can get it out of my head and stop thinking about it so much. So I wrote it out at like 1 a.m., typed it all out, and I submitted it for publication. I'd found the publisher I knew I wanted, which is called Lolly Publishing. They're local, they're ran by women, and they publish really wholesome, family friendly books. And they published a lot of their books in Spanish, which was really important to me. And so I submitted it. I didn't tell anyone. I thought, okay, now that that's done, I won't hear back for a while, but I can say I did it. And if it's a no, I don't have to tell anyone it's a no. And a few months later, I got the contract. And so that's how it kind of all started. And I'm super proud of the book. And I think it represents the Phoenix Zoo beautifully, but also the importance of art and how it helps us with emotions and share parts of ourselves.
So, Richard, you've published a number of books. How unusual is William's story right out the gate, handing a manuscript over and getting publishers?
It's not that unusual because my first book basically took the same track.
Hmm.
I've written a monthly newsletter to my friends about what it was like to be widowed. And a school mom that I ran into, she was a publisher. She read the manuscript and decided to publish it. So that's how my first book came to be.
Well, yeah. So, for those people who may be thinking that this is an insurmountable thing, because if you start looking at YouTube videos and they talk about, how you have to submit manuscript to various different companies and you need somebody to help you do this and do that. But you guys, so really probably right place at the right time, huh?
Probably.
Yeah, I think the advice I would give is just do it, right? I was so worried that after I mailed it, and I think the best thing I did was mail it quickly so I couldn't keep going back to it. So I made the copies the next morning and off it went. And my first draft was not great. I changed the name of the character halfway through for some reason, but it was also 1 a.m. and I was a bit sleep deprived. But the publishers really saw the story and what the story could be, and that's what mattered. So I think we are harder on ourselves as writers than we need to be. Just get your thoughts down, and they don't have to be pretty, and they don't have to be neat, and they don't have to be grammatically correct. Just get them down, and then you can go back and do some of that fine tuning. After it gets accepted, it goes through a whole editing process that cleans everything up and keeps the story intact, but makes it where it's more user friendly or family friendly, easier to read.
Well, Fran Poe in Harvest, Alabama is watching, and she has a little grandson, Solomon. What is it that, as you write for children, are you writing with more focus on the story, or are you thinking about the children? Are you thinking about how you get the adults to want to buy the books for the children? What's your thought process when you're doing this?
Well, I like to just create a story so that the kids will follow it and look at it. And I have a great artist who tells the story in pictures, which just adds to the whole thing. But sometimes you put humor in there for the adults. So when they're reading it, they're going to get something, but the kids are going to follow the mouse and see what's happening with him and all the little things we have. So we really write for the kids to have something to look at and to make them laugh. It's usually what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a lot of experience reading a ton of books to my kids. Both of my kids have a lot of books. We read every night. We purchase books anywhere we go just because it's a good souvenir for us to have, and it's something that we really enjoy. And I noticed that the books that I enjoyed the most were the ones that, whenever I was reading them, I was really into the story too. Like my kid could find things in the photos, and there was words that were repetitive, and the story had a meaning behind it that they could understand and that they could use. But really, it was the stories that I, as the adult reader, or I, as the parent, still found enjoyable, and that's how I try to write my kids' books. And also just things that I find funny in the world. So my second book is about a pigeon, because whenever I took my kids to the zoo one day, there was a pigeon in an enclosure, and my kid thought that pigeon was what was supposed to be in that enclosure, and he's like, wow, look at that pigeon. And really, it just had gotten in with like an antelope or a tortoise. But I had thought it was just, it was funny to me that my kid was so impressed by this pigeon that we've seen a million of in the zoo, like on the paths and things like that. So it's just finding humor in your day to day lives and creating a story that connects and helps a parent speak to a kid about an emotion or a feeling or a situation that they may encounter.
So when you all talk about having something for the adults, I think about the cartoon that I watched as a kid, Bugs Bunny. And so you watching Bugs Bunny on the level that you can comprehend, but then as an adult, I've seen some Bugs Bunny cartoons go, man, I didn't know Bugs Bunny was saying that. I didn't know that's what Bugs Bunny was talking about. So you guys have done the same thing.
Yeah, at least I try to put something in there that's going to keep the adults interested, and that way there they can relay that interest to the child as they're reading the book to them. Gives them something more to talk about, something more to explain, and help the bonding between the adult and the child, that they both like the book because there's something for each of them in there.
So let's talk about the illustrations. You write the story, and then talk me through the process. William, would you start that for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So my process, after I wrote the story, after it went through editing, it was ready to then be presented to the illustrators. Our publishing team, which is Carrie and Laura, the owners of Lolly Publishing, they submitted it to illustrators, and then those illustrators created just quick drawings of how they saw Ruby, the elephant, or how they saw Rosa, the zookeeper, or the other animals. And so I had several submitted to me, and then I didn't know the name of the illustrator. All I had was these photos to go off, or these renderings to go off of, and I put them in order of the one I liked the most, or the one that I thought was closely aligned with how I saw Ruby. And luckily, it was the first one I chose. That illustrator was available, and they took the project on. But I really see it as a partnership. Like I've said this to my illustrators before, and I have a different illustrator for my second book because my first one went to art school, and they're just now starting their first semester. And illustrating a second book is a lot to ask, and so their focus is on school, which I absolutely respect. So I have a new illustrator who's really amazing for this second book, but I really see it as a partnership. Like I don't give a ton of input. I try to let the descriptions be in the words of the story, but the great thing about a good illustrator is that you can take out a lot of the descriptions because they can just make it part of the story with their drawing. But I see it as just as much their story as mine. So I really give them what their expertise is, which is art, and let them make the character how they would see it from an illustrator's perspective.
I do about the same thing. Is give the illustrator the freedom to illustrate what I've written in her words. Well, in her pictures actually. But sometimes I've had to change the words to match what she's written because what she did was add more depth to it. So it also helps kids understand things. But I just love the way she illustrates. It's funny. It just adds to it. But it is, like you said, William, it's a collaboration. We work together to get the best book possible so that, it is her book and my book. And I work with an illustrator. It's like we get the sketches about where the story is, what it's going to sort of look like, agree upon it, and then it goes from there into the full artwork.
So you talk about this relationship. It's almost like a marriage. You bring what you bring to the table, and then your illustrator fills in the gaps with what they bring with their lines and colors.
Well, it's certainly true because I can't draw, so I can write the words. She can't write, but she can create these great pictures that tells the same story, but in artwork. And so I really like that. Her characters are wonderful. They span everybody, and they're just fun. I laugh when I see her work.
I do think of the books as being like kids, but I also think of the phrase, it takes a village, because it's more than just the illustrator and the author. It's the editor, it's the publisher, it's your marketing team, it's the readers, it's the reviewers. There's just a ton that goes into it. And I really didn't know how much went into it until I started this journey. But it's really incredible that at the end you get this physical book and you wrote it, and all these people have worked on it and put time and effort in it, and it's absolutely a team effort to create this. And there are a lot of people in the background who maybe don't get their name on the book, or they get the recognition they deserve, but absolutely it's a team effort. And it really is incredible once you open that box and there is this book you've been working on for a year plus, sometimes a lot of years. And now it's in physical form, and other people are going to get to see it and enjoy it.
Well, Richard, you talked about what you enjoy about going to the book festivals is that you get to sometimes meet children and parents and be able to interact. And for those who are watching, I really appreciate you watching. And if you're in the area, I hope that you will go attend the Sunshine State Book Festival, sponsored by the Gainesville Writers Alliance. The opportunity to bring readers and writers together. When you have an opportunity, what do you think that you are able to do in meeting with those who purchase your book? How special is that for you to be able to attend a festival like this?
It's pretty important because I think I'm like a 4-year-old in my mind sometimes. So I can talk with the kids about what they're going through. Sometimes I sit right on the floor with them and talk to them. And I talk about, the book and the characters. If they have pets, we talk about pets because there's always a pet in the story. And just get the kids talking. And then they just ask me questions that, most adults wouldn't do. They said, Well, how old are you? Why are you obsessed with books? What's your favorite pet? You know, and I just love the way they answer things. It's just straightforward and honest. And I just like relating to that type of mindset.
Yeah. What's special for you, William?
Yeah, I would agree with Richard absolutely. I think realizing that this book that you produced will impact a child, and maybe it's just a book they read once and that's fine, or maybe it's a book that they keep coming back to. But my stories generally revolve around animals, and specifically the zoo. And kids love the zoo, and the zoo is a place where they get to see things that they wouldn't normally see in an everyday life. But if my book helps one kid realize the importance of sticking with something you love, because that's kind of the story within the story of mine, is that Ruby is constantly told that she's not an artist, she's an elephant, so she just needs to be an elephant. And if that helps one kid realize that, hey, it doesn't matter what other people say. If this is what I want, I can do this. It's up to me. Then it's absolutely worth it. But getting to thank the readers, or getting to thank the kids for looking at the book, and again asking them questions about what's their favorite animal at the zoo, and just being able to show my appreciation for their time and their interest in the book is absolutely worth it.
Richard and William are both authors. They are children's authors as well as Richard. You've written some other books, some nonfiction books. Your books center a lot around grief. Your wife died when you were 39. She was 38, I believe, and you had
Yes.
two small children. How did you bring the writing aspect to a place of therapy for you and your sons?
Well, basically, I was journaling what my experience was after my wife passed away. And that journal became my first book. And in order to give my children some normalcy in their life,
Hmm.
I just started doing fun things that I thought was fun for children to do and making up stories. And one of the stories, which never got published, was called The Attack of the Floor Pickle. It's just the kid's imagination thinking the pickle that he dropped was attacking his foot. And the third graders at my kid's school just asked me to tell it again and again and again. And it's like, it was just fun. So I really wanted my kids to laugh more. And that's why I started writing the children's books.
And how did that work for you and for them?
I think they enjoyed it. But as they get older, they really were embarrassed by their dad if they didn't want him coming into the schoolhouse and schoolroom, especially when they turn teenagers. It's like, no, Dad, we don't want you in the school. But the school wanted me, so which was pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. So, William, your children are 8 and 4,
Yes,
and,
ma'am.
yeah. So people may not just. I mean, we know about Dr. Spock, um, but do you think that people are surprised to find out that you've written children's books?
That I've written children's books?
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's separate from what I've written previously. So I've gone to school for a lot of years. I also my one of my master's degree was in technical writing. So the things I wrote were very direct, and I used evidence, and I had sources, and so it wasn't writing that I thought about the reader as, oh, they're going to be so excited. They're going to think this is so cool when they flip the page. Whereas my kids' books, the kid book, I can, right? So it was just a fun way to get this story down, but it also opened my eyes to not only children's publishing, but just the number of stories that are out there. And, in this process, I have found some kids' books out there that I'd never heard of. They don't, make some of the list, but they're so brilliant and they're so beautifully written. And it just is inspiring to see some of these stories that come out, especially recently, where a lot more of the independent writers or independent publishers are starting to have a little bit more visibility. So one of the things that was super important to me is my kids are bilingual, and we really struggled finding Spanish storybooks. We would find some that were bilingual. We'd find some that had Spanish words kind of mixed in, but just to find a fully Spanish version of books, they're out there and we have a lot of them, but there just wasn't as many options. So it was important to me that my books would be translated into Spanish. because I want my kids to realize how important that was. I want them to know that it was important to me that we nurtured their being bilingual, their learning of Spanish, and that we created books so that other kids who spoke Spanish could enjoy them. So it was definitely, like Richard said, it was something that I had my kids in mind the entire time of, how will this impact them? And luckily for me, I can still be a cool dad for a few more years. My 8-year-old is getting a little bit where he's like, hey, I can walk to my class by myself. And I'm like, yeah, but I really want to do it. So I think, have 3 or 4 more years. And the 4-year-old, I have a few more. So I'm going to milk it for all I can because I love it at this point.
You're still a cool dad for a few more years.
Yeah, for a few more. Like my kids are illustrated in my first book. So there are 3 characters that 2 of them look like my kids. And I didn't know the illustrator was going to do that. They just did it. But they think it's kind of cool, but I can tell my 8-year-old is like, yeah, we don't have to show it to everyone. Like, so yeah, I have to play the cards that I have right now.
Either of you have your books, any of your books there that you could read us a bit from?
Yeah, I have one book. This is
William, do you have the elephant? I see the elephant behind you. I didn't know if that was a book or a picture.
Yep, nope, it's the book.
Okay, so Richard, could you read a little bit from which one of your books are you going to read from?
Martin the Mouse in the Haunted House.
So you have a trademark on the character, the mouse.
Right. Yeah, Martin the Mouse.
Martin the Mouse. Martin the Mouse. Where did you get Martin the Mouse?
Just talking with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law. They had a mouse in their house, and we just started talking about mice in different houses, and we came up with the name Martin because it could be a president, as to the first Martin in the White House, and it just stuck, so that alliteration.
Gotcha. Okay, let's hear some of your Martin the Mouse story.
Okay, I'm just going to take it from the middle of the book. They're in the house. The ghost asked Frankenstein, "How did we get a mouse in the house?" "Ah," Frank grumbled. "These costumes look so realistic," said the reporter. "I feel like I'm unraveling," said the mummy. "My dinner is getting away," wailed the vampire bat. "I'm trying to save you, little mouse," wailed the princess. Danielle the cat imagined a mousy dinner.
Very, very cool there. A mousy dinner. Those illustrations are very nice. Very nice, very nice. So, what's the elephant? What's the elephant have to say?
Yeah, so I'll just read it again from just a middle part of the book. So one day, a hawk lands on the tree branch next to Ruby. He scowls while he watches Ruby hard at work and asks her, "Why are you using a perfectly good stick to scribble on the ground?" "I use it to create art," she says, smiling at the curious bird. Not sure if you can see it. He shakes his head and ruffles his fluffy wings. "That is silly. Elephants are not artists, so you should find something else to do," he says and flies away. What's better than doing something you love? Ruby asks herself. Right away, she knows the answer. Nothing is better.
Cool. It's so nice. Charlene Oval said, "Great show." She's watching. She's raising her grandson. You know, and then we got thumbs up from Fear Over Facts and Fran Poe in Harvest, Alabama, that's watching. What do you say to the parents? I mean, this is October, and looking at what to get children and grandchildren for presents. What do you say to them about using books? Not Kindle, but books. Nothing wrong with Kindle.
Right.
How is that different for children, and what is it that we teach them by giving them these books?
Well, I think we give them a totally different experience than a Kindle or an ebook because it's something physical. They can hold, they can smell it, they can keep going back and forth. And it's an interaction with the parent also. It's about, well, what's in this page? What does that mean? Why is this happening? So it really creates a better bond because it has a textile aspect to it. And some kids learn by touching things. And books have a touch, sense of smell, and for me, it's just more of an engagement.
William?
Yeah, I agree. I also we buy a lot of books and we keep a lot of books in our house because they're references for us. So if something happens with my 8 year old at school and that he was picked last for something, or there's always a book we can go to and reference it and read it that night and be like, hey, remember that this happened. The other thing about books is they teach responsibility, and you have to take care of them and you have to put them back. And on some of these road trips that we go on that are through mountains and through desert areas where there isn't Wi-Fi or there's no way, the iPads die. Books don't. You can always pick up a book and read it, and that's what. So it doesn't require batteries. And a lot of the times, my kids will just flip through books and just look at some of the pictures, and that's fine too, as long as they get something out of it. And books are something you can share with others. And if there's books that we're done reading and that my kids aren't referencing them or we're not going back to them, then we donate them, or we find a friend that we think will enjoy it, or we give it to our local library. And I think that passes on that story to another family who can get a lot out of it.
Do you find that we have to work harder to move children from the electronics to hard copies?
I can only speak for so I don't think we do with my kids, but I also think that they really love the drawing and they really love looking at how art was created. So for Elephants Are Not Artists, the illustrator created it on an iPad. All of her illustrations were done via technology, but they can trace their fingers over it. And it's not this bright, harsh light. And I think that there is a place for electronics, absolutely. But to be able to have something you can physically flip the page, and to Richard's point, I'm so glad he said it. Books smell, and they are something that you know if you drop it, it doesn't break, and it's I don't know. There's just something brilliant and beautiful about them. And we absolutely have iPads for our kids, but we don't do the reading on them just yet because we want them to love books as much as we do and take care of books and understand that we're so fortunate to be able to have these and be able to keep them and reference them when we need them.
Yeah, yeah. Richard?
Well, like, of course, when my kids were growing up, we didn't have iPads or any electronic readers, so that we had books and we kept reading them until we basically wore them out. And my oldest son now has four sons. I have four grandchildren, and he limits their screen time, but they always have books in the house, something they can go to, something I can sit down and read to the grandchildren. They range from 14 down to 2 years of age. So it's a great mixture of interests, but we can definitely sit down and read to them. Even if they can't understand the written word, like William said, they can point at the pictures. They can say, "What is this? Why is it this way?" It's just a great way to interact.
Yeah, I think people who don't read to children are missing out on something, whether they can read or not, as you said. But it's just the fact that they are nestled around you. I remember my mother read, I'm the 11th of 13 children. We didn't have much in terms of things, but we would be sitting at her feet and she would be reading. And just as parents, just to have your children see you read. My mother read the newspaper every day. And to help instill that, the importance of learning and watching on LinkedIn, Rocky Miller said, I agree, something special about the touch, the ownership, and the accomplishment. I appreciate all of you who are watching, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or on LinkedIn. Thank you very much for watching and your support. Support the authors and book festivals in your area. Certainly, if you're going to be in Gainesville, Florida in 2023 in January, we would love for you to come to the Sunshine State Book Festival, January 27th and the 28th at Trinity United Methodist Church. These two gentlemen are among 150 authors that will be a part of that festival. And, they're saying something like 3,000 people plus who will come through at this festival. And that's very exciting, very, very encouraging. Fran Poe in Harvest, Alabama, her grandson is 10 years old. Either of you written anything for older children?
No.
I'm in the process right now of storyboarding out a story that will be for kids 9 to 12. Because my 8-year-old is moving in that direction, right? So I want to try to focus on what he would be interested in. But I feel like it will be maybe a longer process. But I'm in the process of figuring out a storyline for kids that age.
Well, that's interesting that your writing is going to progress as your children so that you can keep them involved. That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, what I know is from my kids, like becoming a parent is what helped me kind of realize what they were interested in, and like their amazement at creating their own artwork, or carving pumpkins, and how it was theirs no matter what it looked like. They did it. And so I think that they have taught me a lot about what the message should be in my books, and my stories, because it's messages that matter to them at one point.
Yeah. So Richard, your books on grief. This last 2.5 years for all of us, we have known of or known personally people who have passed away in this COVID pandemic. Your grief books, are they, some are adults and some are for children?
No, they're all for adults.
They're all for adults.
Correct.
So the children books that you wrote with your sons after their mother passed were just books to help entertain them.
Correct.
Gotcha. Well, looks like there's an assignment for you guys. We need some book. I mean, there's just been so much that young people have had to deal with and continue to deal with today. Grandparents who pass away, parents. So what you all are doing is so important and so critical, and we thank you for lending your gifts, your genius, and putting it pen to paper to help inspire and motivate others to read and write. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Pamela.
So much.
And we thank all of you for joining us, for watching. Thank you for your comments. Again, the Sunshine Book Festival is January 27th and 28th at Trinity United Methodist Church. And then my book, The Art of Forgiveness, is available through my website at PamelaDMarshall.com. The Art of Forgiveness and Expression of Peace. Again, thank you all so much for watching, and we look forward to being with you again as we continue to introduce you to the authors who will be a part of the Sunshine State Book Festival here in Gainesville, Florida. In the meantime, make it a fantastic moment. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Remember, there is healing at the well. We'll see you next time.